Kalvera, good morning, and thanks to Bunkernet for inviting us to share our thoughts. I'll be talking about mostly about the more focused technical implications of the fuels and what we have learned so far and what we can do to mitigate those risks. Because we know that, as we have seen from the last two speakers, the quality of the fuel is not yet known. And as a ship owner, we are facing the dilemma that we have to prepare our high-valued assets against some unknowns. So at the outset, actually, this question looks really very frustrating, to say the least. But being a technical person, we know that there are few things which we can do to at least mitigate some of the risks, if not all. And those risks even involve costs. We have no control about the pricing of the fuel, but we have control on the repercussions of not managing those unexpected fuels on board. So this is a mix and match. So I would like to actually portray a positive image, what we can do against the unknowns. This is the data overall. This is not most up to date, but this gives us the trend that irrespective of the uptake of scrubbers, it should not be called scrubbers, exhaust gas cleaning systems, yes, because they're worth millions, their take-up and towards the end LNG take-up as well, it will not actually be to an extent which will impact largely on the marine fuel market. So we have to rely and we have to be fully prepared to face this the 0.5% fuels challenge. Even if we have the scrubbers fitted on board, there may be some ports where the high sulfur fuel oil may not be available. So still, if you have a scrubber even, then and you don't have actually control on the supply chain and you are not entering in the long-term contracts, then it is advisable that you prepare yourself for the very low sulfur fuel oil as well, because it is very important from the compliance perspective. So this is just data from third party. The thing which actually struck me is there is a consistent non-compliant to start, and it goes for a few years. And this is one data input, and as we have seen from the Platts, and there are other organizations which tells us the similar thing, that there will be some 5 to 10% of the non-compliant that may be intentional. But looking at attending the IMO meetings, it will be difficult for those ships to operate in the Europe or in the Americas or in some other countries as well, despite there are lack of resources on the checks and verifications. One other thing from this graph, and this is consistent with all other data inputs, that the compliant fuels entering into 2020 will not be like 100% very low sulfur fuel oils. It will see it's approximately 50-50 split between the gas oils, the very safe option, and the very low sulfur fuel oils. There may be different reasons to that. Again, one thing, as I said earlier, that even if a lot of ships are taking scrubbers on board and fitting with LNG, but their total impact is not more than 1 million barrel per day, and the total fuel consumption is approximately 4 million barrel per day. So still, there is a huge 3 million barrel per day of the fuel oils that needs to be consumed and supplied to the marine industry, and that's where our focus is. Just a quick roundup, because it's important when you talk about the quality of the fuels and talk about preparing yourself or your assets against the unknowns. It's important to know what has happened at IMO. Uni has kindly actually gone through all this, but I'll just go through some specifics. First of all, the fuel oil non-availability report. There was some discussions about the technical implications that you can still put a FONA report based on the technical implications stating that your ship, it is not safe for your ship to load that fuel. But unfortunately, after a lot of discussions, incompatibility, which was seen as a biggest concern, or stability, were not considered those technical aspects which could be used to lodge the non-availability report. Mainly because these are the things which can be dealt, if not 100%, to a larger extent, with the proactive ship implementation planning, and to understand and to configure your fuel systems and bunkering strategies according to the 2020 risks. That's one of the very, very important things, because if some ships find themselves that due to real safety reasons, they are unable to load compliant fuel, still they need to demonstrate that what they did about a year ago, for example, now, to identify those technical implications, to identify the limitations of the machinery, of the systems, and what they did to mitigate those. If you can successfully, for example, demonstrate that we identified, for example, our boiler system cannot use very low sulfur, very low viscosity fuels, and at some port we procured 0.5%. We tried to procure, but its viscosity was less than 5 centistroke at 50 degrees. So, and we have been in contact with the boiler manufacturers, and we have tried our best to get these things repaired or the right equipment fixed, but they had no slot. So that kind of stuff, which is actually can be backed hugely by your proactiveness and your preparation, that may be acceptable for the limited period. But if you find out that you have one tank or an engine, or you don't have heating capacity, and you are loading a little bit of high viscosity fuel, that may put you in trouble. So that's the clear message which we give to our clients as well when we talk about the preparedness about the 2020, that technical implications, as we have seen in the press, that it is portrayed as a loophole, but it is not a loophole. Those people who have attended these IMO meetings, they know that it was put intentionally, and they really mean it, that they are going to listen to the ship's genuine problems, but to think about that these can be used or misused, I think it's not realistic. And a little bit on the non-availability and non-compliant. So what at PPR 6 was discussed is the non-compliant intentional or non-intentional. For example, even if you lodge fuel oil non-availability report, you are not complying to MARPOL Annex 6 regulation for the sulfur cap, but you are also not complying to the sulfur, high sulfur carriage ban. So there are two things. And then for the carriage ban, they may actually take more stricter actions. There have been some discussions about, to allow ships to sail to the next port, to allow ships to use it after mixing it, to allow ships to take some other actions and keep it on board for the next 6 months or so. But that all were, heavily debated, and I really doubt, personally, sensing the mood at PPR 6, that any port states, even at the MEPC 74, will allow carrying of that. And this is specifically not a good, news for the ship operators, because if you travel from A to B, and with the current situation of the global warming and unexpected weather conditions, you should have a lot of, a safety margin on the fuels. But what that safety margin will be, if it is 200 tons, if it is 10 tons, if it is 50 tons, then that is a real question, that once you load it and you are fully compliant, you are fully complying the law by putting the FONAR, but still your judgment about the safety margin can be penalized. So that's a tricky question. I think that should be, we hope that should be clarified in MEPC, but looking at the the historical developments. I think that we should prepare ourselves for such eventualities, especially in our planning, what we will do in such cases, how we will limit our risks. Maybe we have to a little bit change the voyage or change the bunkering plan to avoid that, unexpected to happen. So the big questions about the cost and everything is there, but now we focus only on the two things: what is the adaptability of the systems and the people, and the quality of the fuels. These are two interlinked things. If we know the quality of fuel, then it's easy for us to go and fix our systems. But if we don't know the quality of fuel, then we are only left with the fuel systems and training of the people. And that's the only thing which we can focus more and more today. And I think that with the run-up to 2020, in the second half of this year, we'll have more clear ideas about the quality of the products that may be available across the globe. We still see and we still analyze very low sulfur fuel oils. Most of them are, by the nature of the refining and by the nature of their the crude slate and what sweet crude or they use. So in South America, we know that there are few ports that historically have always supplied low sulfur fuel oil like 0.2, 0.3. But my question now is, because that sulfur was supplied as a high sulfur fuel oil, and that product could not be actually used or sold at the premium rate, but now we expect that products will be transported or somehow moved across the different parts of the globe. So it may be that the products which we see now in South America, which is very, very good, may not be that or may not be that much available in that part of the world. Specifically, when we talk about this very low sulfur fuel oil, we have a very live example of China, where they have implemented 0.5% regulation, and they are supplying 0.5% fuel. So that actually, when we look at the 0.5% sulfur fuels, the Chinese samples, their quality data gives us more clues than what we test from the South America or maybe from West Africa as well. This is just realizing the fact that there have been some rumors and there is an ambiguity in the market. We have started plotting all the data. Now it's available on the LR website, so anybody can go and check this data, availability of the different fuels, and not only the availability of the fuels, also the quality of those fuels as tested by us. We will also actually input the ports where the fuel is available based on the news only, but we will mention that this is based on the market information, but where the quality data is displayed, it will be the data analyzed by LR. So if you look at the, when we talk about the very low sulfur fuel oils, it is not some rocket science. It is not something that we can give you a golden bullet to actually resolve all your problems. We need to go to the basics. And when we talk about the people on how to manage these fuels, the first thing we say that you start to unlearn your accumulated knowledge in your head about how you treat the fuels, because every single blend may be quite different to the others. For example, if you see the data from China or overall this data, irrespective of what you order, that should be according to the ISO 8217, but what you get can be completely different. Your viscosity can be like as low as 10 or as high as 400 something. So when you have such high viscosity range, and that's also true for the density as well, and that's also true for other parameters as well, then you are not you are not supposed to follow your historical stored data, especially when you are managing the fuels on board. You need to look at each product individually, and you need to get as much information as possible before loading so that you can even store it in an appropriate way. Same is true for the pour point, although actually ISO put some limits to the pour point of 30, but you know, a hypothetical scenario, you go to a port, you order a 380, that is perfectly fine, but they say, by the way, my pour point is 45. So I don't think so that is a point where you can issue fuel non-availability report unless you have done your work before and you have checked what you can do against that risk, and you are right on the path to mitigate that. So unfortunately, that kind of stuff, which is real, as happening now, and we see that it will only can get worse because there will be more pressure on the supply chain. The interesting thing, which is normally not actually discussed mainly in the market, but what our data shows also, that cat fines which are getting a little bit more bigger risk once again, because the data at the back side is the cat fines averages from FOBAS analysis in 2017-18, and the gray bars shows the data of the very low sulfur fuel oil and the cat fines. And you see that, you know, there are more instances of higher number of cat fines than lower number of cat fines. So it means that with the very low sulfur fuel oil, it is possible that you get maybe not 2010 grade, maybe 2005 grade, but again, based on this, it is difficult, on almost impossible to lodge the fuel oil non-availability report. So with compatibility, stability is good, but we need to actually be more focused on these cat fines as well. And talking to the various industry stakeholders relative to a refinery, they also say the same, that okay, they cannot guarantee about the cat fines will be lower because it will be a light product now. So it will be within the specification, yes, of course, of ISO specifications, but it can be up to IT, and if you see you have more instance of more than 50, then it's very difficult to get that removed through normal onboard treatment. Another important thing is the viscosity-density relationship, and that affects the CCAI. And with the various different blends, maybe CCAI may not be that relevant, but the ignition and combustion is still a question on the new products. And what we advise to our clients, there are two ways of looking at things, yes? One way is we say that, okay, whenever you load the new product, and as part of your ship implementation plan and to limit your risks, you start using it on the 2 strokes, and if everything goes right, then start using it on 4 stroke. But there are people who say, yeah, we will directly go and use it on 4 stroke. If it works well, then 2 strokes will not be a problem. So, but there is an issue on that as well that we need to be aware of, that with the new blends, this ignition and combustion characteristics, that may not be rightly called CCI because they will be different blends, but that can be an issue. So what we think is the main problems is the tanking and the fuel system configuration. If that is done, in our opinion, about 90% of the risks or 90% of the concerns about the quality can be dealt by simply working on your tanking arrangements and the piping arrangements. This is equally true because even today, for some ships, what we identified is if you have a forward tanks, deep tanks in the forward of the ship, and your pumps may not be able to transfer that fuel from the forward because maybe the viscosity you get is very low. It's not 380, it's not 180, it may be 5. but that fuel is compliant. That is rather good for you because you need less heating to make it go to the engine. But will your pumps, will your transfer arrangements capable of transferring those? That's a question, and that should be actually, you know, in our opinion, is a real question, and that should be tackled when you are planning the transition. Equally oppositely, if you have very high pour point, and all the tanks are capable of heating that to a little bit more than above average levels, because I know I'm a seafarer and I know that it's difficult to get tank temperature more than 35, 40 in extreme cases, yes, and also it's not a wise use of energy. But what you can do if you get high pour point, very fine fuel, that will be fantastic in all other terms, but how you are going to manage it. What if you have high pour point fuel and very low viscosity fuels? So it can be tricky as well. So the problem is not only the tanking, but also the tanking with the heating and no heating. So that's a multiple thing, and also the transfer lines. If it's running through the deck, then in cold weather conditions, what can happen to them? As the other things I talked about, the main important thing is about cylinder lube oil and the lube oil generally. We have seen, and there is at least one lube manufacturer that say that you may still have to have high BN fuel lubes as well. That we recommend that you run your engines on high BN fuel once a week. Yes. So it's not only that you only need to talk about or concerned about the quality of the fuel, but all the relative ripple effect, all the things which comes under the ripple effect. It may be that you still have to have two type of lubes, cylinder lubrication. One is low BN and the high BN as well, and then you need to make a plan together with the engine manufacturers when to switch and how much to switch, because these are all interlinked. What we found out, another thing is that, for example, a simple thing like viscosity, it's normally they are not working, and in my experience, we never used to, look at them in that detail with that interest, because it was always, if it's not 380, it is 320 or it is 390, but almost the right temperature will bring the viscosity of the fuel in the right frame to enter the engine and run the engine. But with the new type of fuels, your sensing of the viscometer or your feedback to the heating or cooling may not be that effective, and then what you do? We suggest that this needs to be taken into consideration, and any alternative arrangements must be made. For example, there are various calculators available on board online, and also we also have the calculator. Then you need to cross-check with that if it doesn't work, then how can I cross-check and adjust the viscosity? Because a simple thing like viscosity can wreck the engines. It's enough if it's not correct. So there are definitely there are a few things which we can do, but we also suggest that to put focus on the training of the people, because that's really important. That if we have served on board, you may have experienced that when you are working in the engine room, in the machinery space, fuel is not really the first and topmost priority for you. You only go to the purifier room if it overflows or if something happens. And above all, it's a machinery, it's a machine, it is running, you have no clue about it, that whether it is running fine, it is not running fine, it is doing its work or not. So that's the kind of stuff we need to put back into the minds of the engineers on board, and not only engineers on board, but the whole people related to the ship management, that we need to be aware of, first of all, the fuels, its related risks, and the variance that can happen, and that will happen definitely, and how it will affect your operational profile maybe. and how it affects your maybe efficiency. There may be an issue with the energy content of the fuel. So there are different aspects, and apart from machinery, we need to focus also on the people management. Yes, let's talk about some of the specific concerns. ISO 8217 working group is working really hard to develop something for the industry which will benefit owners, operators, and also benefit the fuel suppliers in the supply chain to understand the risks. The only difference which was in the past and in the future is, in the past you may go away with only the transactional relation. You go, you search for the right fuel, and whoever is cheapest, if it is the RME 380 grade fuel, you go and you take it. But as part of going transition to 2020, we strongly suggest that you sit with the intended supplier, you discuss with them, maybe you discuss in more detail what are your operational constraints, what are your machinery constraints, what are your technical implications, and how they can address that. I've seen compatibility is seen as a fuel quality spec, but with all due regard to the ship's operations, because we represent owners, but compatibility of the fuels is definitely not a quality parameter which should be tackled or concerned by the supplier. Okay, they can give you assurance if it is the same supplier, but I really doubt that as well, because they may not have control on the products which they supply in different parts of the world, even in the same part in different time zones. So it's really tricky, and that's why it's important we go back to the drawing board and see what I can do to keep the fuels segregated. If I can't do, what should I do? Should I bunker more oftenly? No. Okay. Should I take some extra gas oil, to run for the interim period? How would I do? And if I have some issues, how will I tackle it? How will I keep my ships running? How I will ask charterers in my charter parties that please give due regard